Let's start with the state of the parties.
Yes, this is our first polling that has been conducted since Andy Burnham became Prime Minister. And we do find a bit of a shift. So Reform UK are still in the lead. They're on 26%. But actually, Labour leap up. They're now on 24%. So Reform UK only have a lead of 2 points over Reform UK. That's the narrowest gap that we've seen since April 2025, before last year's local elections. The Conservatives, not far behind that, on 22%. So actually 4 points between the top three parties. The Liberal Democrats a little bit further back on 11%, and the Greens there as well. So it may be, and obviously, next week some of those announcements will have settled in, but it may be we're seeing the start of this Burnham bounce.
Right, so, grounds for a cautious, guarded smile on the Labour Party's part when it comes to their relative position to Reform UK, but looks like grounds for a rather broader smile when it comes to Andy Burnham himself.
Yes, absolutely. So if there's been a smaller bounce when it comes to the party scores, there's been a much bigger bounce in Andy Burnham's personal approval rating. He jumps up to plus 13 approval. That's actually higher than Keir Starmer ever got in our polling. It's higher than he got, when he was on plus 11 in the wake of the general election. So, it is a good start. People seem to like what they're seeing from Andy Burnham. And interestingly, because Kemi Badenoch is still positive, she's on plus 3, so, behind, but still positive. This is the first time we've had both the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition in positive approval territory. Yes. And for an era when we're all supposed to think politicians are rubbish, it's actually quite unusual.
Yeah, well, probably a bit early to start talking about, is two-party politics quite dead yet? But what about Nigel Farage?
Yeah, so Nigel Farage, when we spoke last week, I said that he had dropped to his lowest score since the general election. He ticks back up a little bit, but not much. He's still on his second lowest score, minus 22, tied with Zach Polanski on minus 22. And again, it's interesting, these insurgent parties, Reform and the Greens, so, almost leader-centred, actually. Both Polanski and Farage have driven Reform and the Greens forward, and yet their approval ratings far underwater at the moment. Obviously, that's net approval. There are some people who do have a very positive opinion of both of them. But I think both of those leaders of those newer breakthrough parties might be thinking, we're going to have to do something different in the Burnham era, in the era where Kemi Badenoch is getting more positive ratings. Maybe it won't just be enough to be doing what we did before.
Right, quite interesting, isn't it, to have your numbers on the report card that the government of the Burnham Down Street are getting at this very early stage. We've got some polling here on what Britons make of Burnham's start in government. Tell us more.
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to ask people was, will Andy Burnham be given a totally fresh start? Will he be given a clean sheet? Or will actually, when voters at the next election are deciding whether to re-elect Labour, actually will it be what he's done plus what Keir Starmer's done? Interestingly, 71% of voters think that he deserves to be judged just on what he does, not on what his predecessor did. But they're much more sceptical of his promise to bring about the most significant change in 40 years. In fact, 60% say they think it's unlikely that he will be able to do that. And I think part of that is, of course, you remember, under Keir Starmer, the government ran on that change manifesto. And I think certainly from our focus group conversations, some people are a little bit more jaded. They're not sure. I should say Labour 2024 voters, they're more split. There are some who are more optimistic, some who are less optimistic. So willing to give him a sort of clean sheet to start from, but at the moment a little bit sceptical as to whether the degree of change that he wants to bring about is realistic.
And maybe a bit of a lesson here when it comes to the use of language, by politicians in general and a Prime Minister in particular. We've heard Andy Burnham say a number of times now, it's time for an end to neoliberalism. But, the problem for a lot of people is they just don't know what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually asked this week, we asked the public, we used that phrase, how much of the problems, the challenges that Britain faces can be put down to neoliberalism. And 5% said most of Britain's problems. 15% said some of them, and 9% said few, and 3% said none. But 68% answered don't know to that question. And when we asked people, could they define neoliberalism themselves, even more, nearly 80% said that they couldn't do it. So that might be an argument he wants to keep for sort of Labour Party audiences rather than the wider public.
Yeah, different audiences require different kinds of speeches and different vocabularies, I suppose. But you do want to have an impact and people to get what you are saying. And as for the policies that we've seen touched upon in the course of the first week of Andy Burnham's premiership, energy bills, what are people thinking?
Well, he's definitely hit on the area that the public are particularly concerned about. In fact, 3 in 5 said that Burnham's main priority should be bringing down the cost of living. And when you ask about that cut on VAT on electricity bills, 63% support it. Slightly more actually support bringing back the £2 bus fare cap. 67% support that. Now, of course, look, when you're handing stuff out as a government, it's rare for the numbers to be, bad on that. But what I thought was interesting was one of the things we also asked is, basically, is it right to do this universal support, to take VAT off electricity bills for everyone, or should he have targeted it and given more to households who are struggling? And actually, 57% of the public say, it should be a cut across the board, compared to 35% who want something more targeted. And I think what that speaks to, and what we hear in focus groups, is this sense of, well, actually, the very rich get looked after, the poorest get looked after, and people on benefits get support. But what about me? I'm just above the threshold. And so I think he's made the right call by making his first announcements universal.
Okay, now just talking about attitudes generally, a few days ago we were, very many of us were pretty much football obsessed with the World Cup finals going on. And we can just look at Thomas Tuchel, the England manager, and how his fortunes have waxed and waned. Maybe there are lessons in there too. What do you think?
There are. Well, so Tuchel started off with plus 13 approval. After that victory against Norway in the quarterfinals, went up to plus 36, way higher than any of our politicians. But I wanted to know, after some of that criticism of his management style again in that match against Argentina, would it stay above water? And it does, but it's down significantly. He's now on plus 12. So the rise and fall of Thomas Tuchel's approval rating, but still pretty close to where the Prime Minister's at.
Okay, for whatever that may be worth. And Lionel Messi, the great Lionel Messi, he's not quite flavour of the month, is he, anymore?
He's not. The proportion of Britons with a favourable opinion of Messi has fallen from 55% to 29% since the start of the World Cup.
Well, still, an awful lot of politicians would settle for that, wouldn't they? Luke Tryl, let's talk next week. Take care.